I know you've done a lot of work in Japan concerning renaming schizophrenia. Can you tell me a bit about it? Why change the name at all?
Well, it wasn't me doing this work. It's in fact the organization of families of people with mental illness, as well as some organizations that have brought together people who have experienced illness and the Psychiatric Society of Japan. They negotiated for a long time, and finally they decided they would change the name of schizophrenia. I have to precede this with one sentence to say that the word schizophrenia is not used in Japan at all. All the diagnoses that we have here are translated into Japanese or into other Far Eastern languages, so that in fact, the word for schizophrenia was a word that described a disruption of the brain function, quite a cruel description of the condition. And it was so cruel, if you wish, that doctors found it very difficult to tell their patients when the patients asked them what kind of a diagnosis do I have. They very often hesitated to give this diagnosis because people would be frightened by what they heard. So that the change was to a large extent due to the fact that the disease name was translated into the local language. In Europe, that's not the case. Everybody uses the same Greek word to describe the disease, but there it was a Japanese name that was used. So they changed it, and they changed it to a name that now is no longer the disrupted brain or broken brain or something, but it was changed to something which is a disorder of the coordination of thinking. And when you speak to a patient, he says, yes, this is exactly what I feel. My thinking is not as it used to be. It's somehow disrupted. So people found it much more easy to accept this. And one of the consequences of that change was that the number of doctors who are now able to say their diagnosis to the patient was very much increased. When they saw that it worked more or less well, they also introduced it into the legal documents, so that now the formal name is the new name which they have given, which is the disorder of integration of thinking, disorder of coordination of thinking.
Concerning society in general, did it have any effect on how people perceived
the Professor Sato has done a survey to see what effect it would have. He discovered that many of the people who had the disease were in fact happier to have that new name than the other one. Society as a whole does not react too much to all of this, so they remain neutral, if you wish. But the patients themselves, by and large, feel it more easy now. Doctors feel more easy to speak about the illness, and the acceptance of the diagnosis is much better.
So is it easy to be more open about it as well?
It is easy much more easy, because it's not a terrible sentence that you are getting. It's a description of a condition which you are recognizing. In Korea, the description is even nicer, because in Korea, the description of schizophrenia is an attunement disorder. Like a piano which is not in tune, you have to put it back in tune, and then it is again harmonious. And so the attunement disorder is one which has been very accepted by the South Korean patients and families who were using it.
So it has had a lot of positive effects in many respects.
I think it did, yes. I think at least we have to wait for a little longer time to see whether in fact the new name will maybe become again not so very popular. But for the moment, it's somehow as if this was a different disease, a disease which has a much better outcome, much better prognosis. And it should be said that the psychiatrists in Japan have also rewritten what is the definition of the condition. They said that this is a condition which can be treated, that a large number of people will recover. They said what kind of treatment exists, etc. So they not only changed the name, but accompanied that by a change of the concept of the disease, which was widely spread, entered into the textbooks, entered into the normal language and normal descriptions.
Was that an easy thing to do? Did it take a long time? And how was it received to begin with?
Well, I think it was, nothing is easy. I mean, first it needed courage to propose this, and to find a way to agree with the patient and the family and the professionals to do this together. That is a first in a way, because it is really rare that professional societies and patient associations find an agreement about things so relatively quickly. It was a lot of work because one had to rewrite the descriptions of the disease, and one also had to go to the parliament to change the name, because in the law now the new name is also in there, which meant that the parliament had to discuss it and approve it. So there was a lot of work around it, but I think it altogether, to me at least, has a positive outcome.
You mentioned Europe and the European name, schizophrenia. Do we need to do the same in Europe? Do we need to change the name as well?
Well, there have been several proposals. There was a group of people who experienced schizophrenia in Holland who have proposed a new name. I think they call it susceptibility to psychosis. Some of the doctors have proposed the names which are related to the probable physiological or pathophysiological process that happens. But none of these recommendations have in fact taken ground, and none of them has been accepted so far. Whether I think the name would change is perhaps much less important than thinking about the way in which one can assume a different relationship with people who have the diagnosis. And that is a process that would take a bit of more time and more effort, because it would mean a change in the education of all those who are in relation to the patients. That is, of course, the doctors and the psychiatrists and the mental health staff, but equally so society as a whole, schools and others, who would have to assume a different position. Once the person who has this condition and is different is accepted, it doesn't really matter what you call him. So it's not the name alone which is the bad thing. It is, in fact, how people accept the person who carries that name that is to be changed.
So if I understand you correctly, there are cultural differences within Europe, but also between Europe and Asia, and how we perceive and talk about?
No. I think that, unfortunately, to my great regret, by and large, for most countries in the world, the attitude that the general population has to people with schizophrenia or with other mental illness is still negative. And the discrimination that happens in so many walks of life is terrible. And in some countries, of course, in an interesting way, the families want to retain the name of schizophrenia because it is linked to a pension. And if they lost the name, they would also lose the only source of income. So that's another factor that enters into this negotiation. But I think that it's really a matter of long-term change of the curricula for the training, the ways in which everybody is trained, from school children who should learn how to accept disability much sooner than they learn the names of the kings, to the nursing staff, to the doctors, to the psychiatrists, to anybody who is in fact living in a society. Because it's not enough that just one profession gets better in their views. It really has to be a societal change.
So, may I ask you your visions for the future? How do you envision stigma developing? What would you like to see happen?
Well, we have done a series of programs, and while I was president of the World Psychiatric Association, we had a program in 24 countries, which was called Open the Doors, and we have seen that there is practically no country in which you could not do something useful to diminish the stigma and diminish discrimination. No country is sufficiently poor to say we cannot do anything. So that we now have a series of things that we can do to diminish stigma, to diminish discrimination that goes with it. And it's very much a matter of the decision of a country and decision of the government and everybody else to say, let's invest a little bit more to increase tolerance of people, to increase the acceptance of people who are different, no matter why they're different, but who are different, be it it's migrants or mentally ill people or God knows what. Each one of those should be accepted for what they are, rather than be rejected on the grounds of a name or grounds of color of skin or something.
So even we have made, even if we've made progress concerning stigma, there's still a long way to go.
Well, this depends on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. I think we've made progress, and I would say for an optimist it's a short way to go. For a pessimist, a little longer.
Thank you very much.
A pleasure.